followed by Senator McGuire and then Senator Gaines.
Well, thank you, Madam President and members. I know the hour is late. This is the only bill I've chosen to speak on today. I want to start by thanking the chair of our Budget Committee, the vice chair, all members of our multiple budget subcommittees, and our leadership for bringing an imperfect budget, but a budget that recognizes the economic recovery in California, invests in our children, invests in education, invests in higher education. And yet, as we've heard, there are defects. There are serious gaps. And I share the view of my good friend and colleague who I have great respect for from San Jose, who's been a champion and a leader and a voice for the developmentally disabled community. None of us, we all share, regardless of our party affiliation, there is not a Senate district in California that doesn't have families who need the helping hand of the state of California to raise a developmentally disabled child or adult. In my district, the struggles around the closure of Agnews State Hospital that led to resistance from families who knew of no other option, who were skeptical about the closure of that facility. And then to meet a young man in his 50s who was raised at Agnews and never spoke, never could orally communicate with his family, with his mother. And his mother resisted the closure of that facility for her fear that his fragile medical condition, he would not survive the transfer. I met this young 50-year-old man, late 50s, at one of the 962 homes in Morgan Hill, which was established after the resistance of people in the neighborhood who feared the unknown of what would this group home of medically fragile, developmentally disabled people do to their neighborhood. And once it's been established, they are loved by their neighbors, and there are exchanges with children visiting on Halloween and residents of this home also making the rounds on Halloween and supporting each other. And I met the 80-plus-year-old mother of this man who discussed the transformation that he now communicates orally with his mother. And as she reaches the end of life, and for many in the developmentally disabled community, the greatest concern is what happens to my loved one, my child, when I'm no longer here, to be their point person, to be their advocate, to make sure they're being taken care of, to make sure they're getting the medical care that they need. She now said to me, I can rest peacefully now knowing that my son is in a loving home and he's continuing to grow as he's communicating for the first time with me orally and with his housemates. So that's one of the success stories of what we've been able to do with planned closure, individual plan for each resident, working with a family member, but having the community home resources and support to make that transition not only possible, but more importantly, to make that transition successful. So we look at the budget bill before us today, and we see a continued commitment of the administration to working toward the closure of the developmental centers. But the other side of the equation, we're being asked to wait, to restore provider rates where there's been no increase since 2006. Yet we've raised minimum wage, the cost of living has gone up, the cost of property has gone up, the cost of insurance has gone up. And so we have a provider community that can be described as no other than Good Samaritans, than Mother Teresa's, than people who sacrifice their own economic success because they're responding to a higher calling to serve the developmentally disabled communities. My good friend and colleague spoke of the Lanterman Act, the Civil Rights Act of perhaps the last protected, discriminated against group in our nation, and a group that too often has relied on others for voice, and yet, as we all know from our Budget Subcommittee 3 to our broader Budget Committee, it is a community that knows how to exercise voice and doesn't depend on others, but does it from their wheelchairs, from breathing apparatus, and with attendants who are often necessary to help communicate that voice. But it's a loud voice that we have heard, and yet we have a budget system where our legislature, both houses, we exercise great power, but not the ultimate power, because it is the governor's office that can accept our budget, veto our budget, or blue pencil our budget. So we've chosen to cooperate and negotiate and to recognize and respect that power vested in the governor's office. And we've been asked to postpone this piece of it and address it in a special session. And while reluctant and not necessarily confident of where this will lead, this is our path at this point. We could vote no today on this. That doesn't advance the cause of the developmentally disabled. This has a piece of the equation. But our path, members, is now the special session. And for all of those on both sides of the aisle, who everyone here has a personal story from their district, from a group home, from a developmental center, from a family member, everyone here has articulated a shared commitment. And yet our options may not be all the options we wish we had to work with. And so the challenge, and the challenge to all of my colleagues, is to remember the very strong advocacy that's been uttered on this floor and in our budget committees in support of the developmentally disabled community. And when that choice comes, to place a vote that will indeed leverage the resources to invest in this community, where justice delayed has, in fact, for many been justice denied. When that time comes, I hope you will test your passion and compassion for the developmentally disabled community by casting a vote that you may not be comfortable with, but at the end of the day is the option we have to make good on our commitment and indeed our legal responsibility under the Landerman Act. Members, I urge your yes vote on SB 82, and more importantly, enlist your support to engage as solution finders in the special session and to realize we may have limited options, and within those limited options, we still have an obligation and an ability to do the right thing. I urge your aye vote on SB 82. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Monning. Senator McGuire.
Thank you so much, Madam President. Would like to just start out by thanking the passion of both senators from Monterey as well as San Jose, and would also like to thank the Budget Committee staff as well as the Budget Sub-Chairwoman for all of their work, in particular including in the language local stakeholder involvement and protecting developmental center staff, and of course investing any savings into continued delivery of services to some of our state's most vulnerable. I represent Sonoma Developmental Center. It's the first center on this latest closure list that will shut its doors. And it's imperative that we do not underestimate the importance of careful, deliberate, and cautious planning as we consider the closure of the state's 3 developmental centers. There are 1,100 Californians who remain in our developmental centers, and they are the most medically fragile or most behaviorally involved consumers in the developmental service system, and many of them have tried unsuccessfully to live in the community. And while the state is being pressured significantly by the federal government to move quickly with closure, it is all of our responsibility as legislators to ensure that the needs of the residents of the developmental centers are evaluated as carefully as those residents who moved from Agnews or Lanterman before them. Secretary Dooley's task force on the future of developmental centers outlined the gaps in services that need to be in place for these residents, including additional 962 medical homes, acute crisis facilities, intensive therapeutic behavioral homes, a state-run facility for individuals who cannot, for whatever reason, be safely housed in the community, as well as other specialty services. Families with loved ones at the Sonoma Developmental Center or those other centers that are slated for closure, and the greater community are very concerned about whether vital services and support will be in place for their loved ones when they move. And while it is terrifying for those families to be faced with the uncertainty of closure, it is also terrifying for those who work at the developmental centers and who have spent their careers caring for the individuals who they consider to be family. It would be a tragedy for our state to lose the specialty services that exist at many of these centers, such as the sedation dentistry clinic. By the way, the one at Sonoma Developmental Center is the only one in Northern California. Custom shoemaking shops, wheelchair customization, and many other professional expertise. Furthermore, this budget that we will be adopting today only allocates half of the necessary funding, half of the funding for beds for residents, and does not take into account the high cost of specialty services that will need to be delivered into the community. It is critical that any plan includes input from the community about how to continue important services at each of the centers, and that the administration takes into consideration the work that is coming from both the Sonoma Developmental Center as well as the two in Southern California. I will be supporting this trailer bill, but I urge all of us to stand strong and ensure that in the haste to close the developmental centers, the individuals who live there and the experts who staff these residents and the communities that surround them, their issues are not ignored. These are people's lives, and we need to put their well-being at the top of their priority list. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator McGuire. Briefly, Senator Nielsen, followed by Senator Gaines.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, I will also support this legislation, but with cautions. Cautions that we learn the lessons of history. As a young senator many years ago, I represented Napa and Sonoma state hospitals. Mental health issues at Napa and developmental disabilities at Sonoma. Our colleague, Senator McGuire, now represents those institutions. One of the greatest shocks of my life as a very young, naive farmer occurred when I first went to Sonoma State Hospital and went into the wards. It really was a burden and broke my heart to see what I see or saw and had to experience and then have to deal with an awful lot of over the years, including the families of those individuals. And I certainly empathize with and understand their terror, the terror of what's going to happen with their child. Now, their child may be 60-some years old, and they may have spent most of their years in an institution like that. They have great needs. One of the greatest fears of a parent would be to die, not knowing that their child would be treated or in the safe surroundings. That's why it's so incredibly important to develop the community facilities and resources before and simultaneously with moving people out into that community. It's a lesson we have not yet learned in terms of criminal offenders with AB 109. We have not increased the facilities, but this is about our disabled individuals. So though this is deinstitutionalization is a noble goal, it's a hollow promise unless we have those facilities. And I am not really altogether comforted with this language, that those disposed property revenues will go for community resources. How many times have we seen those kinds of promises broken? Oh, we needed the money to balance the budget, or something else. So though we may pass this bill, ladies and gentlemen, I would ask our honorable body, each of us, Even if we don't represent these areas, we represent families who have individuals with mental health issues or developmental disabilities. And also in terms of the local jails, again, I will note, they're not capable to deal with such individuals in the community if something happens. If they destabilize to a degree that they become unsafe. And our psych techs in these institutions can tell you absolutely how often they have been threatened and have had injuries. They're a huge problem for the psych techs. This is an important issue, ladies and gentlemen. Take it gravely and take it with a resolve today, if you do support this, that you don't think the job's done. Our tasks only begin.
Thank you, Senator Nielsen. Briefly, Senator Gaines, and then Senator Leno, you may close.
Thank you, Madam President and members. I rise in support of this, but very concerned about the funding mechanism. And it seems to me that there's adequate funding, given that we've got additional revenue that was not anticipated coming into the Treasury. There should be clarity here with the shutdown of these facilities statewide, that money is guaranteed, that is going back into the developmentally disabled individuals in our state. Maybe there's a better way to do it. Maybe streamlining it and not having the centers throughout the state is a better pathway. Maybe money can be saved, but there ought to be an income stream as a result of the benefit of the closure of these facilities, and that ought to be delineated. I don't know why it's not delineated, so that that clarity of funding is there for those who are in precious need of these services. So I urge an aye vote, but also clarifying that there's plenty of revenue in the Treasury, and there ought to be clarity on the close down of those facilities, and that funding ought to go back to developmentally disabled individuals. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Gaines. All debate having ceased, Senator Leno, you may close. Briefly. Please.
Thank you, Madam President. Colleagues, I don't know that I could add anything to the fine articulation and stated passion to attend to the work yet ahead. The very fact of a special session sets expectations. This is not a task force. This is not a committee. This is not a working group. This is a special session of the state legislature to take on the need to restore reimbursement rates in our healthcare system and to find a new and dedicated revenue source to pay for the sustainability of the restoration. I stand shoulder to shoulder with all of you who spoke for the need to do this and to state my unequivocal support to get the job done. I ask for your aye vote.
Mr. Secretary, please call the roll.
Allen. Aye. Anderson. Aye. Bates. Bell. Aye. Berryhill. Block. Aye. Canella. Aye. De Leon. Aye. Fuller. Gaines. Aye. Galgiani. Aye. Glazer. Aye. Hall. Aye. Hancock. Aye. Hernandez. Aye. Hertzberg. Hill. Aye. Hueso. Huff. Aye. Jackson.
Aye.
Aye. Lara. Aye. Leno. Aye. Leva. Aye. Liu. Aye. McGuire. Aye. Mendoza. Aye. Mitchell. Monning. Aye. Morlock. Aye. Morrell. Aye. Wynn. Nielsen. Aye. Pan. Aye. Pavley. Roth. Aye. Runner. Aye. Stone. Aye. Vidak. Aye. Wachowski. Aye. Wolk. Wolk, aye.
Please call the absent members.
Bates. Berryhill. Aye. Fuller. Aye. Hertzberg. Aye. Hueso. Mitchell. Wynn. Pavley.
Ayes 35, no 0. Assembly amendments are concurred in. At this time, Senators, the regular session will stand in recess and the first extraordinary session will be convened. Pursuant to the provisions of the proclamation of Governor Brown, the 2015-16 first extraordinary session will come to order. Pursuant to Section 9150 of the Government Code, Danny Alvarez, Secretary of the Senate, Debbie Manning, Sergeant-at-Arms, and Neva Marie Parker, Minute Clerk, are in their respective places. The prayer and pledge will be deemed complete. A quorum is present. The Secretary will read the proclamation of the Governor.
A proclamation by the Governor of the State of California. Whereas, maintaining infrastructure is a critical function of state government and vital to California's continued economic growth. And whereas California faces considerable challenges in its ability to fund crucial maintenance and repair of its core transportation infrastructure, state highways, local streets, roads, and bridges, and current resources do not adequately support the maintenance of this vast system. And whereas the current fuel excise tax revenues are only sufficient to fund $2.3 billion in annual highway repairs, leaving $5.7 billion in unfunded repairs each year based on the latest estimate of the state's deferred maintenance. And whereas these extraordinary circumstances require the legislature of the state of California to be convened in a special session. Now, therefore, I, Edmund G. Brown, Jr., Governor of the State of California, in accordance with Section 3B of Article 4 of the Constitution of the State of California, hereby convene the legislature of the State of California to assemble in extraordinary session in Sacramento, California, on the 19th day of June, 2015. In witness whereof, I have hereunto set my hand and caused the Great Seal of the State of California to be affixed this 16th day of June, 2015, Edmund G. Brown, Jr., Governor of California.
Thank you, sir. Senator De Leon, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I move that the Officers Committee on Rules, as well as the standing rules of the Senate, with the exception of the standing committees of the 2015-2016 regular session, be deemed the same for the 2015 first extraordinary session.
Without objection, such will be the order. The oaths of office will be deemed complete for the elected officers. Senator De Leon, you are recognized.
I also request unanimous consent to take up SCR number 1 without reference to committee or file.
Without objection, please, Mr. Secretary, please read the resolution.
Senate Concurrent Resolution 1 by Senator De Leon relative to the joint rules for the 2015-16 first extraordinary session.
Senator De Leon, you may proceed.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Colleagues, this resolution presents the joint rules for the first extraordinary session. I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, please call the roll.
Allen. Aye. Anderson. Aye. Bates. Aye. Bell. Aye. Berryhill. Aye. Block. Aye. Cannella. De Leon. Aye. Fuller. Gaines. Aye. Galgioni. Aye. Glazer. Aye. Hall. Aye. Hancock. Aye. Hernandez. Aye. Hertzberg. Aye. Hill. Aye. Hueso. Huff. Aye. Jackson.
Aye.
Aye. Lara. Aye. Leno. Aye. Leyva. Aye. Liu. Aye. McGuire. Aye. Mendoza. Aye. Mitchell. Aye. Monning. Aye. Morlock. Aye. Morrell. Aye. Wynn. Aye. Nilsson. Aye. Pan. Aye. Pavley. Aye. Roth. Aye. Runner. Aye. Stone. Aye. Vidak. Aye. Wachowski. Aye. Wolk. Wolk, aye.
Please call the absent members.
Cannella. Fuller. Hueso.
Ayes 37, no 0. The resolution is adopted. If there is no further business, the first extraordinary session will stand in recess, and we will convene the second extraordinary session. Pursuant to the provisions of the proclamation of Governor Brown, the 2015-16 second extraordinary session will come to order. Pursuant to Section 9150 of the Government Code, Daniel Alvarez, Secretary of the Senate, Debbie Manning, Sergeant-at-Arms, and Eva Marie Parker, Minute Clerk, are in their respective places. The prayer and pledge will be deemed complete, and the Secretary, a quorum is present. The Secretary will read the proclamation of the Governor.
A proclamation by the Governor of the State of California. Whereas the state's recent expansion of health care coverage has resulted in more than 4 million additional Californians receiving coverage through Medi-Cal, and whereas to date, the Managed Care Organization tax has provided a stable source of funding to help pay for the cost of the health care expansion, and whereas the federal government has issued guidance to the state that it cannot extend the Managed Care Organization tax in its current format, and whereas the state will be forced to make more than $1 billion in program cuts beginning next year if the Managed Care Organization tax is not extended, and whereas the state's general fund cannot afford to provide additional rate increases for providers of services for Medi-Cal recipients and consumers with developmental disabilities, and whereas the state's general fund cannot afford to permanently maintain a restoration of 7% of hours in the in-home supportive services program, and whereas these extraordinary circumstances require the legislature of the state of California to be convened in a special session. Now, therefore, I, Edmund G. Brown, Jr., Governor of the State of California, in accordance with Section 3B of Article 4 of the Constitution of the State of California, hereby convene the legislature of the State of California to assemble in extraordinary session in Sacramento, California, on the 19th day of June, 2015. In witness whereof, I have hereunto set my hand and caused the Great Seal of the State of California to be affixed this 16th day of June, 2015. Edmund G. Brown, Jr., Governor of California.
Senator De Leon, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Colleagues, I move that the officers, the Committee on Rules, and the standing rules of the Senate, with the exception of the standing committees of the 2015-16 regular session, be deemed the same for the 2015-16 second extraordinary session.
Without objection, that will be the order. The oaths of office will be deemed completed for the elected officers. Senator De Leon, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I request unanimous consent to take up SCR 1 without reference to committee or file.
Without objection, Secretary, please read the resolution.
Senate Concurrent Resolution 1 by Senator De Leon relative to the joint rules for the 2015-16 second extraordinary session.
Senator De Leon, you may proceed.
Thank you much, Madam President. Colleagues, this resolution presents the joint rules for the second extraordinary session. We've had much very passionate, very heartfelt, very compassionate debate and dialogue on this issue, in particular as it relates to the developmentally disabled community. This is an opportunity we have with the second extraordinary session to engage on this issue with all of our colleagues, Democrats as well as Republicans, collectively together. No doubt about it, given the compassionate debate that we have just heard on this floor, we have a real opportunity to come together and to work together and to engage our great governor of the state of California to bring about justice and equity for the developmentally disabled community. So with that, I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. President. And would the Secretary please call the roll?
Allen? Aye. Anderson? No. Bates? Bell? Aye. Berryhill? Block? Aye. Cannella? De Leon? Aye. Fuller? Gaines? Galgiani? Aye. Glazer? Aye. Hall? Aye. Hancock? Aye. Hernandez? Aye. Hertzberg? Aye. Hill? Aye. Hueso? Huff? Jackson? Aye. Lara? Aye. Leno? Aye. Leyva? Aye. Liu? Aye. McGuire? Aye. Mendoza? Aye. Mitchell? Aye. Monning? Aye. Morlock? Morrell? Wynn? Nielsen? Aye. Pan? Aye. Pavley? Aye. Roth? Aye. Runner? Stone? No. Vidak? Wykowski? Aye. Wolk? Wolk, aye.
Please call the absent members.
Bates? Berryhill? Cannella? Fuller? Gaines? Hueso? Huff? Morlock? Morrell? Wynn? Runner? Vidak.
Ayes 26, noes 2. The resolution is adopted. If there is no other business, the second extraordinary session will stand in recess and we will reconvene the regular session. Under motions and resolutions, without objection, the Senate journals for June 15th through the 19th of June 2015 will be approved as corrected by the minute order. If there is no other business, Senator Mitchell, for what purpose?
Point of personal privilege.
Without objection.
Thank you. I just wanted to acknowledge a number of my colleagues today have come up and expressed your ongoing pain with regard to the shootings in South Carolina yesterday. Several of you asked if we're going to South Carolina. Several of you asked, what can we do? And I would just say that I am sure in all of your respective districts, at places of worship, there are things happening in your districts. I hope that you would participate. And please know that as the California Legislative Black Caucus will be supporting the National Black Caucus of state legislatures in honor of our fallen colleague, we will be continuing to communicate our desire that the Confederate flag be removed from the State House in South Carolina, and we'll be supporting the President of the United States message as he related today with regard to the extended use of firearms. So I just wanted to say thank you for your comments. I don't think there's a need to go to South Carolina because that could have happened in any state in the union. And as state leaders here in California, we should be in our districts talking about the realities of racism and nonviolence. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Mitchell. If there is no other business, Senator De Leon, the desk is clear.
Thank you very much, Madam President, as well as colleagues. I wanted, before we all depart and catch our flights, let's give an extraordinary recognition to our chair of the Senate Budget Committee and our vice chair of the Senate Budget Committee. Madam President, as well, we want to give a special recognition to our staff, to both the Democratic staff as well as the Budget Republican staff, but in particular to Craig Cornett, our budgeteer director for the California State Senate. Let's give a special recognition as well, too. With that, colleagues, I hope you have a wonderful, productive weekend. We will convene at 2 o'clock come Monday. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The Senate will be in recess until 3:30, at which time the adjournment motion will be made. We reconvene Monday at 2 p.m.